I guess it's Saturday, December 19th, 2020. A time when people like me, high risk, heavily traumatized by the situation, still have no one to tell, no one to hear from regarding when we may receive the vaccines that are now being circulated. I want to wish the very best to those who receive them, as well as those who don't, and hope that as many people as possible find the courage to stay safe against bad advice. It often happens when I'm making these tapes that I find that I've started too soon. My hearing aid batteries are dead, or I'm not prepared in some way. But one of the fallacies that I have to contend with in working with the Berserkers and the Gurdjieff Society is their idea that preparation is a contamination that voids man in his natural state. And of course, this is their justification for terroristic invasion of privacy, among other things. But I do have to contend with it. As a result of having to contend with it, I feel it's a better idea to show some of the little details that I have to live with that other people don't, for example, because I'm deaf. That's not something that the Gurdjieff Society really cares about because they're spiritualists and they think that deafness is proof of a karmatic deficiency, even though it was inflicted by people who attacked me blindside as a child. I think our society should be concerned about blindside attacks, but let's not go into that immediately. I'm almost ready to get started. My hearing aids seem to be working pretty well at the moment, now that I've changed the batteries. Thank you for your forbearance and endurance. One of the things that the cowards in the military around Tacoma chided me about last night was the idea that lectures in dialectical UW are a form of sporting event. I would get off on the wrong foot to begin with my father and the way that nullification of achievement is written into the methods of this society that's brokering these actions. But I've gotten off on the wrong foot a couple times in this video, so I'll go ahead and describe some of the things I think about my father, because I know what my point of departure with this lecture is, and I can get back to it. But he was like a wounded warrior. You see, there are people who come home from these wars, like in Afghanistan, hideously mauled from bombs and burns, and they don't want to hear that what they did was wrong or in vain, or that the people who they were so teary-eyed to receive awards from didn't have their best interests at heart. My father was a wounded warrior in that way, and he was up against the wall because he disbelieved in the justice of the war in Vietnam. And he couldn't bring himself to forgive Germany for what happened in World War II. And he could barely forgive himself for Hiroshima. So, you have the makings of a very grave situation of a wounded warrior who was in a position of enviable influence at the University of Pittsburgh, Chair of Philosophy of Education. Now, one of the reasons why that's very significant is that you had a Korean War veteran from the Black Studies Project who helped a gang who surrounded his son. And the question wasn't how can they do that to his son? How can they entrap him and mutilate him? But it shifted to why did he let it happen? And his deficiencies as a liberal, as the British would say, was being spotlighted by what Charles Aston called the ugly politics of the University of Pittsburgh. There's a certain idealism that my father had, and people like my father had, the question that I would like to be able to answer, which is, why were we fooled? And what fooled us and what's going on now? Obviously, to survive, we have to answer the question, how can we criticize Biden without the looming danger of the two-eyed cyclops coming back? This is getting me close to my point of departure. Among the rare and radiant remarks of the winsome Donald Trump was the claim that America could not survive the truth about the history of slavery. Now, that seems to me to be a very Russian idea, because one of the things that we found about scholars in Russia was that they weren't able to find the history of what had happened. Sources were gone, the legitimate facts were gone, there was only an unprovable official history. And that's the idea that no versions are allowed, nobody's testimony is allowed if it doesn't match up with the official history, which isn't even admittedly the truth because the country wouldn't survive the truth. It's a lot like what I've been dealing with Penis Gabriel and Ming No Wen. Because they scrubbed everything down to Reagan didn't know and wouldn't let anybody look at anything else. And punished totalitarian ways, murder, torture, rape, anybody who questioned that. So a terror campaign from the Green Party machine, which is largely organized by George Lucas and his Chinese associates, is contemptible in that it's violating the First Amendment, the American Library Association principles, freedom of speech, newspaper industry. But it gets a lot of gloat because the so-called independent reporters all love it. I mean, they love being on the dark side of an attack on freedom of speech. And the curious thing about me was that I was brutally tortured, psychiatrized, and the only reason I went back to school was because I wanted to legitimize my testimony about Mount Desert Island. I made PTK, the girl who taught me sign language was punished, she was raped. She was on death row from the virus because she's very vulnerable. I wish her the best. But I don't want to be seen as special pleading because she'll be targeted. And people wonder what's going on. Well, Bernie, ever the Steppenwolf, coming forward with his reprieve story, warns us of a dour forecast in the future where somebody competent might pull a Donald Trump. As though they didn't plan for Donald Trump or see it coming or know what he was up to when they did. If you look at a very critical stage in all of this in 1992 in Pittsburgh, what you find is a girl named Rosa working for the Green Party who was obviously a hottie who was paid for and sponsored by Donald Trump in the way that a mercenary's Beretta gun would be paid for and sponsored, to attack me, who they regarded as Jimmy Queerbait, on behalf of this machine that they'd set up on Mount Desert Island. And so you have Rosa, the leader of the Green Party, and a name associated with Clemente, who I don't believe would ever go along with this stuff. The rape of Jeannie is not something he would go along with. She has Down syndrome. She's mentally ill from years and years of taunting and abuse but she holds her dignity up. She holds her chin up. I love her more than anybody else in the world. And I don't mean to say she's mentally ill. Like, that's not what I meant to say. She has Down syndrome. She's deaf. She has epilepsy. And she's under stress that other people don't understand. So she has people who know her and can handle her, her um, flabbergast at deliberately being left out, talked around, rather than to treated with the dignity and honor that she's due. Similar to mental illness I have from trauma, heart rate problems, being attacked and castrated by a rock star who lied to me about what his business really was and so on. But the point is, understanding Donald Trump and what's going on in Seattle requires seeing through the 1992 what they did with Rosa. Have you ever seen in high school a bully or a know-it-all or somebody flamboyant who goes around making peace in the gangs by heading straight to the people who people are scared of most, bribing them, giving them something they want, and then saying, hey, I'm the peacemaker, diplomat? Well, that's Penis Gabriel. He heads straight to Abu Jamal. He hates North Korea's Kim, Donald Trump, and he gets all the bullies together, and he creates a super weaponized, be afraid of us, we will kill system from all the hotshots. And this is what we're dealing with. When we see Abu Jamal intoning through a Sherman Alexie, who dies next if they don't follow Jay Inslee, we're talking about a situation of Donald Trump's relations with Kim. That's like a tripartite system. Abu, Kim, Trump, dictating what you will do to save the world. Now, people want equity, they want to save the world, right? So it's all violin music from there. And they had Maduri Goto, masquerading as pursuing the Greta good and blindside sneak attacks on Jimmy Queerbait, the son of the wounded warrior who King Crimson nullified the achievements of. My father's achievements were completely nullified. It's one of the reasons why they ground out my psyche with a nerve agent, was to nullify the Queerbait identity. One of the Jewish lobby who's somehow, and the Tree of Life was shut up, not by my house, ended up speaking for this gang, of course, Dolly Myron. He used to have a slogan, U.S. out of North America, she's very Israeli. That's the truth. So Donald Trump comes and leaves a white rose at Tree of Life, and then in the name of Tupac Shakur, for God's sakes, they murder Cersei Kennedy, the white rose of this symbolism, who had, the middle name of Rosa, Rosine. So you have this situation of, Abu, Kim, and Donald working together in a sort of, shell game, whodunit. And they scribble on my father's grave, don't know who. Well, they do know who. And, Inslee's just a weird nerd of this stuff, So you should read about Moxieland, even if you don't have the time to read the book, because, you have to know how we're being fooled. The people, nice young kids who want to help save the world. Being misled by the Green Party and all of this stuff. It's not a question of why did my father let what happened to me happen? Why did the liberals let Jimmy Queerbait? Why did Jimmy Queerbait allow himself to be attacked blindside? I mean, it's sort of a ridiculous question, but the question is, why were the administration fooled, and why did the people who did it do it? That's more important, You have Schulman stealing books with Penis Gabriel, calling it justified theft. Black people think, whoa, that was stolen from the museum in the first place, man. Who cares? You know, there's no starting point with any of these people. And Wax steals Kennedy's brain from the National Archives and then reports it's missing, right? So you have this situation where um, there's ill-deed reinterpreters of the whole mess. And if you look at the world of Sammy Lee from 1963, you see the world of Jack Ruby that was conjured in books like A Question of Character about Jack, you know, like they have me on their panopticon. So everybody from school sees that I like to look at the beautiful girls, the most beautiful Kyogan, to therapeutize my hard on and so forth, you know, oh, look at the hair, specuous, creepy slaves who we want to set on fire for the virtue. You know, what it comes down to is the, you know, the view that JFK is the unwanted step from yesterday who wants to come back as like the last jack off in the bottom. And the thing is that the world of Sammy Lee was part of the setup of that. And the tapes that were made of King by the Neva Corporation for J. Edgar Hoover. The history of pornography is set by a man named Montgomery Hyde. So King was like Jekyll and Hyde, right? That explains why, because Montgomery is Montgomery's story. That was his first book. It's an index pattern that I have tapes about that I found as a library clerk from the publication industry, showing what the Donald movement was up to, the DTs. DT is a major signifier. John Nehart used it, you know. Now, as the Indian signifier. So when you find, oh, those engines, they think this is cool, you know, Sherman Alexie and all that. But the point is that Hyde also signifies why they wanted Dr. Benjamin Spock to run with King, which has been forgotten and shuffled under the table. Partly because so much about equity in America, these $400,000 tax-free Harris people like Dyslexter King, come with Bob Barkers like Jesse Jackson and Joe Biden, who say, well, it's all settled now. You get the franchise back to normal. Okay, well, that's okay. But, I mean, Spock also was, you know, the highly illogical dude who used to come to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood where my stepfamily married into my mother's arrangements through Mr. Rogers' church, the pastor of whom was part of what happened on Mount Desert Island. It's where Leslie Katz used to meet. It's where the crowd rallies after the Tree of Life, shouting, "Oh, we are Wicca," and all of this wild stuff, you know. So you have Spock, that is not logical, and Hyde, Montgomery, because they're talking about abortion, nonviolence, and conscience. And they have gurued the whole thing for Hitler's Axis and the trial of Sammy Lee, right? So you have the situation that's set up to benefit Imperial Japan's reconquest of the United States. And one of the reasons we know Japan was involved in it is that Nancy Moore had a very bright flash camera. You could see me sort of wincing from the brightness of the camera, you know. And she had these Hitler nuns, which is like swastika girl by Fripp. It's all rights with the royal family. So what you see is certain indications from the axis of how they plan to operate. They say squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, here comes the guy who says the Japanese does. The nail that sticks up gets hammered down, maybe even in Dealey Plaza. So they try to deny, you know, Aaron Dixon tries to deny that it's assassination politics, to deny 6-year-old deaf men with heart problems and serious trauma a vaccine till last because he wants to push himself ahead as a privileged white. They deny that it's assassination politics, but it is. You know, it's the White Rose that murdered seriously, and it's not just responding to this stuff about lectures being a sport, for heaven's sakes, rather than an attempt to preserve the knowledge of people who studied things and experienced things. But it's an Axis snuff film. They're doing this for entertainment from UW. They're murdering, somebody who's trying to escape their murder system. And they say it's special pleading, even when anybody who looks at the history of it can say that I endured privation, homelessness, attacks, brutality, rape of my loved ones, threats on my family to try to get the truth to my peers. My peers refuse to hear it because of this stuff about John Lennon, which is ugly because it looks like it's all BS. The celebrity system wants, the big, magnificent, rare and radiant mind to matter much, much more than the average individual. And my father wasn't even an average individual, but he got in the way, so they nullify his achievements. And then they say, don't say like Aunt Frank Curry, don't say like Wounded Warrior. Those are privileged categories. So you have these people like Louis Lapham who knew the whole thing. And you wonder, how can you be saying that it's not an exchange of gunfire, that it's not shooting up Tree of Life being avenged by the murder of Susie Kennedy? It's not. You look at Louis Lapham's comment, beware the deadly endive, which is a cryption for Andor, the dive off of the World Trade Center, and the poison in the mouth, which was a link between the AIDS attack and the COVID attack. Beware the deadly endive shows that what they're doing is movements. It's like a symphony. It's a movement. He shot up the Tree of Life, put the white rose there, and snuffed Sissy Candy, and all of the voodoo of the shamans of Penis Gabriel come into play, saying, now we have effervescence then anarchic harmony. This is Robert Anton Wilson stuff. So we get to see that they're trying to prevent preservation of our history by any sort of intellectual inquiry. And they call this street scholars, protecting death row, for heaven's sakes. I mean, so, I just wanted to make as clear as I possibly could, that the reason I ended up in PTK and honors wasn't because I felt I was all big or thought I was some important character who was going to come and out harness some sort of election, get us wrong about Joe Biden. It's none of that stuff. I got into PDK because I wanted to make sure you understood that somebody who was not a paranoid schizophrenic was testifying in past lie detector exams that Will Zell spoke as reported. And in Poconos Cafe, before AIDS was known, he said, what would you think of a scheme to transform the human race by injecting the blood, and then ran the AIDS testing operation on Mount Desert and poisoned me in the mouth for UW dialectical. It's now in this COVID scene we're saying, all the creepy jazz, the money is ours. We want the penny, I mean, Larry Klum set up a clubhouse like Klum's Shack, right? And he gets, well, they're not going to investigate. I guarantee they're not going to investigate. They're not going to investigate. I guarantee they're not going to investigate. Larry was a beautiful man. He is a beautiful man. He had a stroke, for pity's sake. What happened and what's going on with Abu is Donald Trump.